The year is 1187, and somewhere in the unforgiving wetlands of Mongolia, a man is running for his life. The ground beneath him is soft, treacherous. Each step threatens to pull him under. Behind him, an army tens of thousands strong is closing in, crushing everything he spent years building. His commanders are gone. His lines have collapsed. What once looked like the beginning of something powerful is now dissolving in a single, brutal afternoon. This is not a tactical retreat. This is survival. Here's the part that doesn't make sense, at least not yet. The man running through that marsh, covered in mud and failure, will one day become Genghis Khan. He will build the largest contiguous empire in human history. His armies will sweep across continents. His name will echo for centuries. But right now, none of that exists. Right now, he is losing everything. And the man responsible for this collapse isn't a distant enemy or a rival empire. It's someone far closer. Someone who once swore loyalty beyond blood. His sworn brother, the one man he chose above all others, is standing on the other side of this battlefield, giving the orders that are tearing his world apart. So how does a man go from this moment, broken, hunted, erased, to becoming one of the most powerful figures in history? What happens in the space between total defeat and absolute dominance? Because whatever the answer is, it starts here. To understand how everything fell apart in that marsh in 1187, you have to understand the world these men were shaped by, a world that didn't forgive weakness, didn't reward fairness, and didn't believe in second chances. The Mongolian steppe in the 12th century wasn't a nation. It wasn't even close. It was a fractured landscape of rival tribes, shifting alliances, and constant low-level war. Power wasn't inherited and kept. It had to be proven over and over again in horses, in men, and in the ability to take what you couldn't be given. Loyalty lasted only as long as it was useful. The moment it wasn't, it disappeared. Into that world, Temujin was born with almost nothing that should have mattered. His father was a minor tribal leader, not insignificant, but far from powerful. And when Temujin was still a child, that fragile stability collapsed overnight. His father was poisoned, and the men who had once followed him looked at the widow and her children and made a calculation. They weren't worth the risk. They left. Just like that. No protection, no support, no safety net. Temujin grew up not as a prince of the steppe, but as something closer to an outcast, surviving on wild roots, fish, and whatever he could take or defend. That kind of childhood changes how you see the world. It strips away illusions early. Temujin learned that loyalty wasn't something you inherited, it was something you earned, and even then, it could vanish. He learned that survival sometimes meant making choices that would haunt you. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already been betrayed, captured, enslaved, and forced to escape more than once. Most people would have been broken by that. Temujin wasn't. Now set that against Jamukha. Where Temujin came from instability, Jamukha came from structure. He was born into aristocracy, into a system that had worked for generations. He didn't have to fight for recognition, it was already there. People listened to him because of who he was. And to be clear, Jamukha wasn't just privileged, he was capable. Charismatic, intelligent, and a natural leader. If you were standing on the steppe at that time and had to bet on one man to rise, Jamukha would have been the obvious choice. And yet, these two men were once closer than brothers. The Mongols had a concept called Anda, a sworn brotherhood that, in many ways, carried more weight than blood. Blood ties were accidents of birth. Anda was a choice. It meant binding your life to another person completely, sharing loyalty, protection, and destiny. Temujin and Jamukha chose each other when they were still young, long before power and ambition complicated everything. They exchanged gifts, fought alongside one another, and at one point, according to the historical record, even slept under the same blanket as a symbol of absolute trust. In a world where alliances were fragile, this was as close to permanent as it got. But the bond didn't break because of betrayal or misunderstanding. It broke because they began to see the world in fundamentally different ways. Jamukha believed in the traditional order, the idea that leadership belonged to those born into it. That hierarchy, that structure, had organized the steppe for generations. It wasn't just a system, it was the system. And from his perspective, it worked. Temujin saw something else entirely. He had lived on the outside of that system, and he had seen its limits. He didn't believe loyalty should be tied to bloodline. He didn't believe leadership should be inherited. He began promoting people based on ability, not birth. He rewarded loyalty directly. He gave ordinary men a reason to fight for him, not because they had to, but because their lives could actually improve if they did. That difference might sound abstract, but on the steppe, it was explosive. Because if Temujin was right, then everything Jamuka represented, his status, his legitimacy, his entire world, was under threat. You couldn't have both systems existing side by side for long. One would eventually prove itself stronger. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just be a clash between two men. It would be a collision between two entirely different ways of organizing power. One rooted in tradition, the other in something far more dangerous. Because if loyalty could be chosen instead of inherited, then anyone could rise. For a while, it looked like their bond might hold. After years of fighting side by side, Temujin joined Jamuka's camp, not as an equal, but as a rising ally. On paper, it made sense. Jamuka had the status, the network, the recognition of the old aristocratic order. Temujin brought momentum, loyal followers, growing influence, and a different way of building power that was starting to attract attention. Together, they represented something formidable. But underneath that surface, tension was building. The break didn't come with a dramatic argument or a clear betrayal. It came quietly, almost subtly, one of those moments that only becomes obvious in hindsight. During a routine migration, Jamuka made an offhand remark about where different groups should camp. To an outsider, it sounded like logistics. But to those who understood the unspoken language of power on the steppe, it carried a different meaning. Temujin's wife, Borte, saw it immediately for what it might be, a signal that their place in Jamuka's camp was no longer secure. That night, Temujin made a decision that would change everything. He didn't confront Jamuka. He didn't negotiate. He left, quietly, taking his followers with him under cover of darkness. Whether the threat was real or perceived almost doesn't matter. What matters is that from that moment on, the alliance was over. And once that kind of bond breaks, it rarely stays clean. It turns into something else. What followed was an immediate war, but something more dangerous, a competition. Both men began building their own power bases, pulling people toward them. And here's where the difference in their visions started to show in real terms. Jamuka attracted the traditional elite, the aristocrats, the established clans, the men who believed the old system should remain intact. Temujin attracted a different kind of follower. Not just the desperate or the dispossessed, but capable individuals who saw opportunity in his model. Men who had been overlooked by the old hierarchy suddenly had a path upward. Every defection mattered. Every new follower shifted the balance. And everyone on the steppe could see it happening in real time. This wasn't just about two leaders anymore. It was about which system would define the future. Then something happened that escalated the situation from rivalry to inevitability. A powerful shaman, a figure whose authority carried real weight in Mongolian society, publicly declared that the eternal blue sky had chosen Temujin. That he was destined to rule, not just his tribe, but potentially all people of the steppe. In a modern context, that might sound like symbolism or propaganda. In the 12th century, it was something closer to a legal claim. It gave Temujin not just influence, but legitimacy. And from Jamuka's perspective, it crossed a line. Because now this wasn't just a rival gaining followers. This was a direct challenge to the entire structure that justified his own position. If Temujin's rise was accepted as legitimate, then aristocratic birth stopped being the foundation of power. And if that collapsed, everything Jamuka stood on collapsed with it. Still, even then, open war hadn't begun. The final trigger, like it often is in history, was small, almost insignificant on the surface. A man connected to Jamuka attempted to steal horses from one of Temujin's camps. Horse theft on the steppe wasn't just petty crime, it was a serious offense. He was caught, and he was killed. By the logic of the situation, it was justified. But Jamuka didn't see it that way. Or maybe more accurately, he couldn't afford to. Because if a man aligned with Temujin could kill someone of higher status and walk away justified, it reinforced everything Temujin was building. A world where status didn't protect you, where actions mattered more than birth. That single incident became the spark. Jamuka didn't call for negotiation. He didn't attempt to de-escalate. He did what leaders on the steppe had always done when their authority was challenged at a fundamental level. He mobilized. 13 tribes answered his call. 30,000 men assembled under his command. Not just to win a battle, but to end a threat. This wasn't a raid or a skirmish. It was a statement. The old order was not going to yield quietly. And Temujin, despite everything, chose to stand and face it. At that point, the outcome wasn't just likely, it was almost inevitable. By the time both sides met at Dallin Baljit, this was no longer a question of rivalry, it was a collision that had been building for years. Temujin didn't walk into this battle as a conqueror. He walked in as a man trying to hold together something fragile, something still forming. Across from him stood Jamuka, backed by the weight of tradition, commanding a coalition that represented the established order of the steppe. 13 tribes. Tens of thousands of warriors. This wasn't just an army, it was a verdict waiting to be delivered. On paper, the ground at Dallin Baljit should have helped Temujin. The region was a stretch of marshland, wet, uneven, unpredictable. In theory, that kind of terrain limits mobility, especially for cavalry, which was the backbone of Mongol warfare. It should have neutralized some of Jamuka's numerical advantage, forced smaller engagements, created space for a disciplined defense. That was the theory. Reality didn't cooperate. The marsh didn't just slow the enemy, it slowed everyone. Horses struggled for footing, formations broke apart, and coordination became harder to maintain. For a smaller force like Temujin's, that was a problem. He didn't have the luxury of absorbing chaos. He needed control. He needed precision. And as the battle unfolded, those were exactly the things slipping away. Jamuka's forces didn't rely on brilliance. They didn't need a clever maneuver or a risky gamble. They had numbers, and they used them the simplest way possible: pressure, everywhere, all at once. Instead of trying to break one point, they stretched the entire line, forcing every part of Temujin's army to fight simultaneously. No rest, no reinforcement, just constant, grinding contact. At first, Temujin's men held. These weren't conscripts or reluctant fighters. They were loyal, many of them personally tied to him, men who believed their future was bound to his. That kind of loyalty matters. It buys you time. It keeps a line intact longer than it should be. But against a force that size, time runs out. The center gave way first. It always does. Not because it's weak, but because it carries the heaviest burden. The fighting there isn't dramatic, it's exhausting. It's hours of standing ground under relentless pressure, with no break and no relief. Eventually, something cracks. A gap opens. And once that happens, everything changes. Because a broken center doesn't just create a hole, it creates collapse. The flanks, which had been holding their own, suddenly found themselves exposed. What had been a forward-facing fight turned into chaos, with enemies pouring through from multiple directions. Units became isolated. Command structure disintegrated. And in that moment, the calculation every soldier makes becomes brutally simple: stay and die, or run and live. Most chose to run. This is the part history often tries to soften, but there's no reason to. Temujin didn't execute a masterful retreat. He didn't preserve order in defeat. He ran, because the battle was lost and staying meant capture or death. His commanders were cut down or captured. His army scattered into the marsh, using the same terrain that had failed them in battle now as cover for escape. Within hours, everything he had built was gone. His army, tung. His authority, tung. His momentum, tung. Even his most important ally, the powerful Wang Khan, was forced to flee the steppe entirely. What remained wasn't a defeated leader regrouping for the next move. It was a man with nothing, hiding in a landscape that had just swallowed his future. There's a tendency to look back at figures like Genghis Khan and see inevitability, as if outcomes like his were always going to happen. But standing in that marsh in 1187, there was nothing inevitable about him. No empire, no destiny, just a man who had taken a risk and lost everything for it. And for a long time after that, he simply disappeared. Victory should have ended the story. Jamuka had done everything right up to that point. He gathered overwhelming force, crushed his rival, and shattered a movement that threatened the foundations of the steppe. If history followed clean logic, Temujin would have disappeared permanently into that marsh. But what happened next is where the story turns, not on the battlefield, but in the choices made after it. In the hours following his greatest victory, Jamuka made a decision that would echo far beyond the moment. He ordered the execution of prisoners, not unusual in itself, but the method mattered. 70 young men from Temujin's army were reportedly boiled alive. This wasn't strategy. It wasn't necessity. It was spectacle. And on the Mongolian steppe, where violence had rules and meaning, this crossed a line. Power was respected. Ruthlessness was understood. But this kind of destruction, total, humiliating, absolute, sent a different message. It didn't say, submit. It said, if you end up on the wrong side of me, there is no place for you. That distinction mattered, because power on the steppe wasn't just about winning battles. It was about building coalitions, and coalitions run on perception. Almost immediately, something unexpected began to happen. Not a mass exodus, not a sudden collapse, but a shift. Quiet at first. Subtle. Men who had fought under Jamuka began to leave. Others who had been watching from a distance reconsidered where they stood. The victory held, but the trust behind it started to crack. Temujin, meanwhile, was gone. For nearly 9 years, the historical record goes silent. Not vague, silent. A man whose life had been documented in detail simply disappears. There are theories. Some historians believe he may have spent part of that time under the control of the Jin dynasty, possibly even as a low-status subject or captive. Others argue he went to ground, hiding in remote regions with a small group of loyal followers, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. The truth is, we don't know. But that silence tells you something. If those years had been honorable, if they had been a steady rebuilding, a quiet but dignified return to power, they would have been recorded. The fact that they weren't suggests something else, something harder. A period of survival, not growth. A stretch of time defined less by ambition and more by endurance. However it played out, it wasn't the kind of story people wanted to preserve. And yet, when Temujin reappears, he isn't the same man who stood at Dalen Baljet. The difference isn't dramatic on the surface. There's no grand return, no immediate victory. What changes is how he moves. He becomes more patient, more deliberate. The impulsiveness that led him to stand against impossible odds is gone. In its place is something sharper, a willingness to wait, to build slowly, to choose his moments instead of reacting to them. He starts small, aligning himself with larger powers when it makes sense, contributing rather than leading, rebuilding credibility piece by piece. And at the same time, he begins constructing something that looks less like a traditional tribe and more like a system. This is where his real advantage takes shape. Instead of relying on inherited status, he doubles down on merit. He promotes based on ability. He rewards loyalty directly. He pulls in people from different tribes, different backgrounds, even former enemies, and binds them not through shared identity, but through shared opportunity. Your position isn't based on where you came from, it's based on what you can do and how loyal you are. That changes everything, because it creates a structure that doesn't fall apart the moment things go wrong. Traditional alliances fracture under pressure. His doesn't, at least not in the same way. The people closest to him have nowhere else to go. Their identity, their future, is tied to him personally. And then, at his lowest point, that structure is tested. After another near collapse years later, Temujin retreats to a remote place called Baljuna. What remains of his following isn't an army. It's a handful of men, just 19. Different tribes, different beliefs, no obvious reason to stay except one. They choose him. Together, they drink from a muddy lake and swear loyalty again. Not to a tribe, not to a system, but to each other. It's a small moment, easy to overlook, but it's the foundation of everything that comes next. Because empires aren't built on victories alone. They're built on what survives when there are no victories left to claim. In the end, the man who once ran for his life through a collapsing battlefield didn't just survive. He outlasted everyone who tried to define the limits of his world. One by one, the rival coalitions fell apart, not always in dramatic battles, but in quieter moments where loyalty shifted and systems proved their strength or their weakness. Jamuka, the man who once stood at the peak of that world, was eventually captured and brought before the same friend he had tried to destroy. What followed wasn't revenge. It was something more complex. Temujin offered him a return to brotherhood, a chance to step back into something that had once been real. Jamuka refused, not out of pride alone, but out of clarity. He understood that there was no longer room for both of them, and so he asked for a death with dignity. Temujin granted it. No spectacle, no cruelty, just an ending that honored what had once existed between them. By 1206, the steppe, once divided, unstable, and constantly at war, was unified under a single name, Genghis Khan. Not because it was inevitable, but because at every critical moment, different choices were made. Some built loyalty, others destroyed it. Some created fear, others created something stronger. That's really the question this story leaves us with. Not just how Genghis Khan rose, but how close he came to never rising at all. How much of history hinges not on power, but on decisions made in moments when no one is watching. If you found this story valuable, take a second to like the video. It helps more than you think. Subscribe if you want more deep, no-nonsense breakdowns of history that go beyond the surface. And I'm curious, what do you think? If Jamuka had made a different choice that day, would we even know the name Genghis Khan?